is. The sun is really nice.
Yeah. Mm,
Just a heads up that I've started the recording.
okay.
Hi, it's Roger, Christine, and Kayla Woods. We're just doing a test on our audio. Can you hear us?
They're nodding yes. So yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you.
Love you, cat. Mhm. Mhm.
You're going to hear my cat from off and on throughout the meeting. I'll put us on mute.
Yeah. I mean that he's happy.
No, she finds the evenings really upsetting. I think the vet thinks she has some dementia.
Oh no. How
And
old is
she's 18 years old.
Wow. 18. Wow.
Yeah.
She's a senior.
Like a real senior, Anna Maria.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Mhm. Mhm. Ahora, people. Mhm.
Vanya, did you want to try your sound again? We couldn't hear you even though you were unmuted. No, we can't hear you.
No.
Sorry, who were you speaking to?
I
Hello, Vanya. Hello, Megan. Hello, everyone. It's been so long.
Can you hear me now?
We can, Vanya, but it's really
It
laggy.
has been. Can you hear me? It is.
Yes, but it seems that you have a little bit of the echo.
Okay, let me see.
It's maybe getting better.
Yeah, it's getting better. I was to say the same.
Okay. So if I speak high like that, can you hear me better?
Yes, at least I do.
Good.
I don't know the rest.
Great.
Dr. Ellingwood, I'm so glad that you're here tonight. It has been a while.
I know it's been a busy time of year. I literally just got off work 10 minutes, so I'll just be keeping the camera off for the first few minutes anyways, just to be able to get my supper ready if I can. Multitasking.
Totally understand.
Good evening, everyone. I'll ask, given that the chair is not yet elected, if I could, on a temporary basis, help with the progression of the meeting, the proceedings today. My name is Eric Pillow. I'm a committee coordinator with the Office of the City Clerk. Caitlin, did you also want to do some additional introductions or?
Certainly, for those of you who I did not meet at our orientation session the other evening, I'm Caitlin Salter McDonald, the manager of Council and Committee Services. Rosa Ramos, your committee coordinator, is online this evening. She's feeling a little under the weather, so she's gonna be helping out, but might not be able to stay the whole meeting. So I've asked Eric, who is the interim coordinator, to help us out this evening and kick off the meeting.
Mhm.
And we also have with us this evening our staff from the Accessibility Office, and then later on you'll meet some other city staff who are here to present for the agenda items.
Okay.
So I think we'd normally do a roll call to start the meeting, but I see that everyone who has not provided regrets is actually in attendance. So I've taken note of that. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the meeting. And we do have quorum, so we can proceed with the meeting on a formal basis. Closed captioning is available. If you wish to turn that on, that's an option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For those participating, it looks like everyone is muted. That's appreciated to avoid some feedback, but of course, don't forget to unmute yourselves when you're taking your turn to speak. And of course, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom. And that's how we keep track of turn order for those who wish to speak on the items tonight. Are there I'll just do a couple of housekeeping things to kick off the meeting, and then we'll get to the election of the chair shortly. Are there any declarations of interest for this meeting? Seeing none. Now, in terms of the minutes, members have received the accessibility advisory. Oh,
Sorry.
yes, Vanya?
Hi. Sorry, Eric. For the benefit of me and others, is it possible to just explain what declarations of interest mean? Just starting out.
I'm happy to do that, Vanya, and for the benefit, especially of any members who were not able to participate in the orientation session or have had the opportunity to listen to the video or see the transcript from the other evening. Declarations of interest are if a member of the committee has a particular conflict of interest on an agenda item and will be recusing or stepping away from the meeting during that item. So we have not received any indication of any members this evening having a declaration of interest. Thanks, Vanya, for that opportunity.
Thank you. So moving on then to confirmation of minutes, members would have received by email earlier today the minutes for March 21st, 2023. However, the minutes for September 20, 2022, the last meeting of last term, are not available yet, unfortunately. So those will be the September 20, 2022 minutes would be deferred for a future meeting when they're available. So for tonight, are the members, could the members confirm the minutes of March 21st, 2023, which were circulated by email today? I'm not sure if someone could just unmute themselves and say carried.
I will say carried, Ana Maria.
Thank you, Ana Maria.
Carried.
It's a little bit of a challenge to both take notes for minutes and try to keep the meeting going at the same time. I appreciate the patience. And then the next item on the agenda is the election of the chair and the vice chair. And Caitlin Salter-McDonald, Manager of Council and Community Services, will be leading the process for the election of those two positions.
Thank you very much, Eric. Welcome to all the new and returning members of the AAC, and a pleasure to meet those of you I did not have the opportunity to meet the other evening. Your first order of business as a new committee is to appoint a chair to preside over your meetings. As those returning members will be aware and new members have been advised, the chair has the responsibility of leading the AAC through their meetings, working with the committee coordinator to finalize the agenda, and as requested or required by the committee, representing the committee as needed to standing committees or participating on behalf of the committee where the committee has asked them to do so. Any member, I'll take a step back for a second. It has been traditional that, like many of our other advisory committees, the AAC will appoint a chair annually, and then at their first meeting of the next year, confirm whether, if they're interested, the existing chair would like to continue, or appoint a new chair in accordance with the committee's preference. As well, this evening, we'll be asking you to nominate a vice chair, whose role it is to act in the place of the chair when the chair is not able to attend and preside over the meetings. So this will be a two-step process. First, I'll call for nominations from AAC members for the position of chair. You may nominate yourself or one of your fellow committee members. If there's only one member putting forward their name, that member would be selected as chair. If there is more than one person interested, we will have a vote on who is chair for the next year. We will then follow the same process for selecting a vice chair. Before I call for nominations, are there any questions from AAC members around this process or the role of the chair? Not seeing any hands raised. So with that, I will open the floor for any nominations for chair of the AAC for the remainder of 2023.
Ana Maria, I think I will nominate Vania.
Are there any other nominations for the role of chair? One more call for nominations. Vania, are you willing to accept the nomination for chair? I see a yes. Nominations are now closed. And by acclamation, Vania, you are the new chair for the Accessibility Advisory Committee until the end of 2023.
Thanks, Ana Maria.
If you'll indulge me, Chair, I'll proceed with the vice chair nominations, and then I'll hand it over to you to bring us through the remainder of the meeting. So with that, I will open nominations for the position of vice chair for the AAC for the remainder of 2023. I'll go to Holly first. I saw your hand raised first. Holly?
Thanks. If it's okay, I'd like to actually nominate myself. I'd love to be able to support Vania and the group. Merci.
Thank you, Holly. Adele, I see you have your hand raised as well.
I do. I'd like to nominate Ana Maria.
Yes. Thank you. And I also like to nominate myself as vice chair to work with Tania. I think we can work together and do good things for people with disabilities, and also thinking about seniors, that we cannot be reactive. We have to be proactive on that area as well.
Thank you very much to both Ana Maria and Holly. Are there any further nominations for the position of vice chair? I'm seeing no further nominations. So we have two nominations for the position of vice chair, Ana Maria and Holly. We will now call for a vote from all members present to select the vice chair. So when Eric calls your name, we would ask you to say the name of the individual you wish to vote for chair for this year. Holly, I see you have your hand up, so I'll go to you first.
I just had a question. Should we maybe mention what we bring to the table? Just in terms, there's a lot of new people here, so I don't know if they know any of us.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Holly. I believe Anne Marie said a few remarks. I'll let you go, Holly, and then we can go back to Anne Marie if there's anything else that she wishes to add regarding why you wish to be vice chair for this year. Sure. Holly?
Merci, Lauren. Bonjour. Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Ellingwood. My pronouns are he and him. Mes pronoms sont il et lui. C'est un plaisir de parler avec vous. I've been for the last 3 years part of the AAC committee, where there's a lot of really important work done. My education background is a mix of psychology and law. Law is primarily focused on social justice and human rights. I am a person with a disability, visual primarily. And I've been doing a lot of advocacy work from my days early on in university up until the work I do in the federal government, where I work to develop 3 different accessibility action plans across 3 departments. I was the head of diversity and inclusion secretariat at Public Safety Canada. And I'm now an assistant director over at the Anti-Racism Task Force, because I think intersectionality is a very important part of disability, as well as the fact that it's not about accommodation, it is about addressing attitudinal barriers, first and foremost, and accessibility. Merci.
Okay, to complement, I am a person also with a hidden disability. My interest is both twofold, advancing the issues of people with disabilities as well as seniors. I am a community builder, over 30 years of working with the community, and I work with the community, and I have both groups at heart to advance those equally, because both groups deserve. In fact, if we paid a little bit more attention to seniors, we avoid preventing them to fall into the category of advancing their disabilities, because at the age, the mobility issues become a major challenge. I am include all members of society, not just the cultural seniors, but all seniors and all people from disabilities. And also include, when I say members of societies, also getting closer to understand our better relation with Indigenous Canadians, because they are intrinsic part of this society. And that is my commitment, to continue working with the same interest for both groups, people with disability and seniors, because both are the same vulnerable groups that deserve our attention, not neglecting one from the other, but advancing both in both directions. In the same direction, I'm sorry. So that is me. Thank you.
Thank you, merci. Thank you to both Holly and Anna Maria. I'll now go over the procedure for selecting the vice chair. Eric will call each of your names, and when called upon, please indicate the name of the individual you wish to select as vice chair for the remainder of 2023. Are there any questions on process before we go to the vote? All right, we will proceed.
Ian Burry, Anna Maria Cruz Valderrama.
And yes, you may vote for yourself. So Anna Maria.
Okay, I'll vote for myself.
Wayne Antle.
Holly.
Matthew Elliott.
I just want to say I think they both do a great job, but I'll vote for Holly.
Holly Ellingwood.
It would be really wrong if I didn't vote for myself, I think. So I'll give myself that vote of confidence. Thanks.
Jody Fisher. Oh, you're muted, Jody.
Holly, I think they both do a great job, but Holly.
Adele Fury.
Anna Maria.
David Humphreys. Banya Karam.
So I just want to say, first of all, I've enjoyed working with both of you the last time around committee. I think it would be good to have somebody at the helm who's lead on seniors issues. So for now, because I lead a lot on accessibility, so Anna Maria.
Murray McDonald, William Van Veen.
Anna Maria.
And Hannah Walad.
Holly.
Whoops, mistake. So 5 votes for Holly and 4 votes for Anna Maria.
Thank you, Eric. So for this year, Holly will be the vice chair. Vanya will be your chair. On behalf of the clerk's office, I just like to thank all those who expressed an interest and their confidence in our returning members who are taking a leadership position on the committee for this year. And with that, I will hand it over to Vanya to chair the rest of the meeting. I will note that Eric has notes on who's here from staff. So Eric, you know, if you need any support, we're here for you for this meeting. And you'll have all that information in advance, Vanya, for your next meeting.
Okay, good. I'm not sure how great I'll be at chairing, but I'll try my very best. So let me see. So I guess the first thing the next thing is Emergency and Protective Services Department presentation. Do I have that right, Caitlin?
Yep. So up first, we have staff who are presenting on the clothing donation box bylaw review. We have David Kurz, Valerie Bietlow, and Joshua Davis. I believe they'll introduce themselves and start their presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hi. So good evening. My name is David Kurz, and I'm joined by my colleagues Joshua Davis and Valerie Bietlow on behalf of Public Policy Development Services in the city's Emergency and Protective Services Department. So we're here this evening to provide a short presentation and a series of questions for the committee's consideration regarding the ongoing review of the city's clothing donation box bylaw. Please note that our presentation slides are also available in French from the committee coordinator, and we will be able to respond to any questions in French as well if requested. Val, I think you're muted, sorry.
Est-ce que vous pouvez m'entendre?
Oui.
OK. Bonsoir, chers membres du comité. Merci de nous accueillir ce soir. Je m'appelle Valérie Bietlow. Je suis la gestionnaire de l'élaboration de politiques publiques. Et avec moi ce soir sont David Kurz, que vous venez d'entendre, et Josh Davis. Ce soir, nous vous présentons un bref exposé sur notre revue de notre examen de règlement sur les boîtes de dons de vêtements de la ville. Et nous souhaitons aussi vous adresser une série de questions. Veuillez noter que la coordonnatrice du comité pourra vous fournir notre présentation en anglais, si vous le voulez, et nous sommes aussi en mesure de répondre à toutes vos questions en anglais aussi. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, you can go back one slide, actually. Sorry, there, perfect. So our presentation will cover the following items. First, we will provide you with a brief background on the city's clothing donation box bylaw and its regulations. Second, we will give you a quick overview of some of the changes to the bylaw that are being considered. Next, we will talk specifically about clothing donation boxes located at city-owned facilities, such as recreational complexes and community centers. And this is the main item that we'd like to focus on with you today. And lastly, we will have a series of questions at the end of our presentation for the committee members' consideration. There will be an opportunity for a discussion on these questions directly after the presentation. And in addition, you are also welcome to take these questions away and provide any comments or responses by email. Your input will be used to provide or to finalize our updated regulations in advance of bringing a final report and recommendations forward to the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee on this review in Q3 of this year. Next slide, please. So currently, rules and requirements for clothing donation boxes in Ottawa are set out in bylaw number 2013-98, which is titled A Bylaw of the City of Ottawa to regulate the location and use of clothing donation boxes on private property. So these rules pertain to clothing donation boxes that are outdoors. Please note that this bylaw and our review project does not address any clothing donation boxes or bins that may be located inside of a building. The bylaw sets out a small number of basic regulations, such as requiring permission from the property owner to place a box on the property. requiring specific information about the operator to be displayed on the box itself. This includes their name, the type of organization, such as a registered charity, contact information, and a schedule of times for the collection of donated items. Operators must also ensure that the location of their boxes does not create a visual obstruction for vehicles and pedestrians and does not block access in or out of any property. And lastly, the bylaw only applies to boxes located on private property. Next slide, please. So the city is exploring updates to the current bylaw to address issues related to property standards, such as garbage and waste and dumping of donations around the box locations, transparency from operators, and to make box operators and property owners more accountable for the state and condition of the donation boxes. And again, our project is only looking at external or outdoor clothing donation boxes. Some of the changes to the bylaw that are being considered as part of this review are box owners being required to obtain a permit from the city in order to operate. This would be for accountability, responsiveness, and the ability to enforce issues of non-compliance. We're looking at updated rules for box location, signage, and maintenance to assist with public health and safety. And lastly, we're looking to have all bylaw requirements apply to boxes that are on private property, as well as boxes that are located at city-owned facilities. And that particular change is what we'd like to discuss with you further.
La Ville envisage de mettre à jour le règlement actuel sur les boîtes de dons pour tenir compte des enjeux liés aux normes d'entretien, tels que les problèmes d'ordures, de déchets et le dépôt de dons. Et aussi pour veiller à ce que les exploitants de boîtes et les propriétaires des lieux soient responsables de la situation et de l'état de leurs boîtes. Veuillez noter que notre projet ne porte que sur les boîtes qui sont à l'extérieur. Nous envisageons plusieurs changements au règlement municipal, tels que le fait que les propriétaires de boîtes seront tenus d'obtenir un permis de la ville. Les règles sur les lieux où les boîtes sont installées seront mises à jour, soit quant à la signalisation et l'entretien des boîtes afin de protéger la santé et la sécurité du public. Et enfin, toutes les exigences du règlement municipal devront s'appliquer aux boîtes sur la propriété privée, ainsi que celles qui sont situées sur la propriété de la ville. Et c'est en fait les exigences pour les boîtes placées sur la propriété de la ville dont nous voulons discuter avec vous ce soir. Next slide, please.
Yeah, sorry, that slide's perfect. Thank you. So as indicated, part of our review has included updating regulations to specifically address clothing donation boxes that may be located at city-owned facilities. Currently, any boxes that are at a city facility are managed through individual agreements between the box operator and the city. Under our changes being considered, donation boxes would be permitted at select city facilities that have been pre-approved in advance by city staff. And to help determine which facilities would be approved, staff from several different city departments work together using a recommended set of criteria to assess the various facilities. The most notable criteria was ensuring that any facility that's recommended for approval to host a donation box has the proper space for all individuals to safely access and operate the box. While there's no specific requirement under the AODA for the location or design of clothing donation boxes, staff did take it upon themselves to consider various accessibility standards and best practices used by the city that would be applicable for this purpose. This included ensuring that a box could be placed on an accessible path of travel with clear space for a forward and side approach and turning diameter. Staff closely reviewed the existing standards for library book drop slots when conducting these assessments. In addition to ensuring accessibility, the criteria also included that the facility must be one that is open to the public, a place where residents are routinely invited to attend. There must be a location on the property where the box is easily visible and has adequate exterior lighting for the safe operation of the box. And it was also recommended that boxes not be placed in any required parking spaces.
En vertu des changements envisagés, les boîtes de dons de vêtements seraient autorisées à certains établissements de la ville approuvés d'avance par le personnel. Pour déterminer les établissements qui seraient approuvés, le personnel a considéré un ensemble de critères recommandés afin d'évaluer chaque établissement potentiel. Les critères les plus importants ont consisté à s'assurer que les établissements ont l'espace voulu pour permettre à tous d'avoir accès aux boîtes de dons en toute sécurité. On souhaite aussi assurer que les établissements de la ville auxquels seront placées des boîtes de dons comprennent des points d'installation adaptés aux personnes en situation de handicap et qui ont des problèmes de mobilité pour qu'elles puissent aussi avoir accès aux boîtes et les ouvrir en toute sécurité. Bien que la loi de 2005 sur l'accessibilité pour les personnes handicapées de l'Ontario ne prévoit pas d'exigences précises pour la localisation et la conception de boîtes de dons de vêtements, le personnel a pris l'initiative de se pencher sur différentes normes et règles de l'art pour l'accessibilité appliquée par la ville. Nous voulons donc assurer que l'on peut déposer des boîtes sur un trajet accessible en prévoyant une zone libre pour les déplacements vers l'avant et de côté en fonction du diamètre de braquage. Le personnel a revu attentivement les normes existantes pour les chutes de retour de livres dans les bibliothèques dans le cadre de ces évaluations. Nous avons donc identifié 7 établissements différents de la ville qui répondent à ces critères recommandés. Nous avons aussi recensé un certain nombre d'autres établissements dans lesquels on pourrait éventuellement installer des boîtes de dons, à condition d'y apporter quelques modifications physiques extérieures pour que les lieux soient accessibles comme il se doit.
So at this time, we have identified 7 different city facilities that meet these recommended criteria. In addition, a number of other sites have been identified that could potentially be included if exterior physical modifications are made on site to allow for the proper accessible space. And again, keep in mind that under the new regulations, boxes could also be placed on private property as long as they meet the city's bylaw requirements and the property owner has provided consent. So to summarize, new and updated regulations are being developed for outdoor clothing donation boxes in Ottawa to address issues related to property standards, as well as transparency from operators and to make box operators and property owners accountable for the state and condition of their boxes. In addition, specific requirements are being proposed for boxes on city property, including that all boxes are located in an accessible and safe area for all individuals. Next slide, please. So to conclude, we would like to put forward the following questions for discussion and feedback from committee members. As I mentioned before, your input will be used to help finalize our updated regulations in advance of bringing a final staff report and recommendations forward to the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee in Q3 of this year. So the first question would be, what are your experiences with using clothing donation boxes? Secondly, are there other criteria that should be considered for city facilities that are hosting clothing donation boxes? And lastly, what information could be helpful for individuals who may be unable to use a clothing donation box? Next slide, please.
En conclusion, permettez-nous de vous poser les questions suivantes pour la discussion avec les membres du comité ce soir. Vos commentaires nous permettront de finaliser la version actualisée des règlements d'application que nous comptons amener au comité en septembre de cette année dans un rapport final du personnel. Et donc, les questions sont les suivantes. Numéro 1, quelle est votre expérience dans l'utilisation des boîtes de dons de vêtements? Numéro 2, y a-t-il des critères dont il faut tenir compte pour les établissements de la ville où on installe des boîtes de dons de vêtements? Et numéro 3, quelle information utile pourrait-on donner aux personnes qui ne pourraient pas être en mesure de se servir de boîtes de dons de vêtements? Nous serions heureux de connaître vos réponses à ces questions ce soir, ou encore vous pouvez volontiers emporter ces questions et cette information et nous adresser vos réponses par courriel après cette réunion si vous le voulez. Merci.
So we would welcome any feedback you may have on these questions. If you want to go back one slide just to the questions. And yeah, so if any feedback you have on these questions today as part of our discussion, we would be happy to answer. And again, you could always take them away as well to provide any feedback in writing. So if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
I had raised my hand. It's Adele Fury. I was wondering on one of your earlier slides, you talked about accessible location. How do you define accessible?
So
Or what are the criteria? Sorry.
So, Chair, thank you for the question. When conducting our assessments, what we tried to look for is that there wouldn't be any obstruction in an accessible path of travel to access the bin. So, like we mentioned, making sure that the floor space or the outdoor ground space in front of the box is clear and free of any obstructions, that there's no tripping hazards, a clear and accessible space in front of the box to come from either a forward or a side approach, and that would allow all individuals to access the box safely and to operate the box safely.
A follow-up? What about snow and ice around the box in the winter?
Yeah, so Chair, thank you for the question again. We did work with staff in our Public Works Department, and we went through each potential location prior to recommending it for approval to make sure that it wouldn't impact any snow clearing operations that have already been that are happening on that site. So we went through each location with our staff from Public Works, and they confirmed that it wouldn't impact their snow clearing operations, and that it would allow for the snow to be cleared around the box to make sure that the space is always accessible through any kind of winter. If there is snow that's built up, that the space would always be maintained clear.
Thanks.
I guess I'm sharing, so I'm supposed to request myself because I have my hand up. So what I want to ask, first of all, thanks very much for the presentation, David. Really appreciate it. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. So I know that the doors to those donation boxes can be quite heavy to open. I've used them. I think they're great, but they can be quite heavy to open. And as well, if you're not a person of, if you're of a lower height, if you're not as tall, they can be hard to reach. I'm wondering if it might be easier to have a rope or something attached to them, just to make them more accessible, as you say, accessible for everyone. That's just an idea I'll put out there.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Part of our consultation with the operators of these boxes, we did ask them if there's any different kinds of design changes that could be incorporated regarding accessibility. Our understanding is that there's only one main manufacturer of these boxes, and that they've been mainly retrofitted recently with regards to safety issues from people trying to climb into the boxes. We did ask if they were under the if their understanding was that any future design changes would be incorporated for accessibility standards, and they weren't aware of any modifications, but they did indicate to us that if the manufacturer were to start to look at different modifications for accessibility purposes, that the operators would definitely be interested in helping out and procuring any boxes that could help with accessibility. So again, these are operated and designed by third parties and not by the city. So we have to work with those stakeholders in terms of understanding what modifications could be made to the boxes.
I would add.
Yeah, actually, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I would add that we are heading into a final round of consultations with the box operators that have been our stakeholders in this spot. So your suggestion about a rope is an interesting one. We'll certainly put that suggestion to them, and we'll report back in our report how it was considered. As David says, we don't have a lot of control over the design, but a modification such as a rope around the handle is something interesting that we'd be happy to bring forward.
Great. And just before I move on to the other questions, David, you did touch on one thing a follow-up question that I had around safety, because I remember reading that somebody actually died trying to get into one of these bins, and I'm just curious what modifications have been made. And that's my last question before I move on to Anne-Marie.
Yes, so thank you, Chair, for the question. Yes, we are aware of some incidences in other jurisdictions that have resulted in deaths from donation boxes. And our understanding is that the main manufacturer of these boxes, they did make some modifications to the different styles of boxes that were out there that had led to these incidences. And again, our understanding is that the retrofits that were made have removed any of the barriers that were causing those incidences of death or injury. And also as part of our proposed new regulatory system, we would require that operators provide the city with a certification from either the manufacturer of the box or a third-party professional engineer that confirms that the box is safe and mitigates any potential risk of injury. So there is a little more accountability on the part of the operators to make sure that their boxes are safe and that they're reviewed and by either the manufacturer or a third party.
Thank you. So I'll go to Anne-Maria next, and then Matthew.
Thank you. I want to reiterate, sorry. I want to reiterate the same question that you brought, Vania. It's about safety, but it's the safety from the inside, because of the reports of the death incidents have been of homeless people that get into those clothing boxes and are not able to open from the inside. And so I think it was in Montreal one case, another in Edmonton, but I don't recall exactly, but it's from the inside, right? And the ability to open, because it's heavy, but rather is if you get into the box and you are not able to get out, especially in winter. Thank you. Yeah. Because the death, I think, has occurred over the winter. I have found people frozen there because they couldn't get out in the time they wanted. Thank you.
Yeah, I can respond to that again, Chair. Just again, with respect to the cases of when this has happened. Yes, we are aware that they have been from people trying to gain access inside the box, and again, the retrofits that were made, our understanding from the manufacturer is that it now prevents anybody from actually getting stuck. You have to sort of pull the chute down. And it wouldn't be able to close behind you. And part of our review is also recommending that boxes be placed in more safe areas where there's proper lighting and foot traffic, which was something that's been recommended by the industry to help prevent injuries.
Great, thank you.
And on to Matthew. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. My question is really a follow-up from Adele about the criteria for the boxes to be in accessible locations, because I know you said that when doing the assessments, you look at things like if it's clear from debris and free of obstructions, etc. Are those examples that are actually going to be in the bylaw as things to look at, or is it more of a general criteria that it has to be in an accessible location, and then it's left really up to the interpretation of the individual assessment, what that means?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair, for the question. So the criteria that we went over, our recommendation right now is that it would not be, that criteria would not be prescribed in the bylaw itself, and it would be, a general recommendation that that's the assessment criteria that's used by staff prior to any facility being approved. So to answer your question, it wouldn't be set out in the bylaw, but staff would take that into consideration when looking at any potential new facilities.
And if I can ask a follow-up question, if the chair would allow, that makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, this isn't the only criteria that would be taken into consideration when deciding whether to approve one of these boxes. So I'm wondering if the other criteria are at the same level of granularity as this one, like if they're all somewhat high level.
So thank you, Chair, for the question. Yes, there's a number of different criteria. We didn't really weigh one more against the other. They're all at the same level. But like I mentioned, so in addition to the accessible location, proper lighting, proper visibility, and not having them in any of the required parking spaces, which is where you typically find these. They all are at that same level.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, great. So any other questions? Okay, thanks very much, David.
Yeah, thank you, committee and members. And like I mentioned, our questions are available through the presentation slides from the coordinator, and my contact information is there as well. So happy to take in any other feedback or responses that members may have by email.
Okay, merci à vous deux.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. Let's go to the agenda. Sorry, I've never been chair before, so I'm going to be slow at first. So thanks for having patience with me on that. So the next presentation we have is the on-demand accessible taxi study. This was definitely something that came up many times during my last tenure. So we're very much looking forward to this presentation. Welcome, Roger and Kayla. I can't hear you, Roger. I think it's on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Thank you for this opportunity to present before the committee this evening. My name is Roger Chapman, Director of Bylaw and Regulatory Services. I have with me today Christine Hertag, who's the Program Manager of Operational Support, and Kayla Woods, who's our Issues Management Specialist. As you know, Bylaw and Regulatory Services licenses and regulates the vehicle for hire industry, which includes limousines, private transportation companies, and taxi cabs in Ottawa. We're here today to discuss accessible taxi cab service specifically. We're aware that many committee members are new to the regulatory aspects of this issue, and we're going to start off with a brief explanation of the evolution of accessible taxi cabs in Ottawa. I will turn the presentation over to Christine Hertag.
I don't know how brief it's going to be, but certainly if you have any questions at the end. Prior to amalgamation, and I know that's not a word we use very often anymore, but we are talking about sort of the evolution of the taxi industry, which has been ongoing for decades, but we're just looking at since amalgamation. Prior to that, there were 6 former municipalities that licensed and regulated taxis. It's Cumberland, Gloucester, Canada, Nepean, Ottawa, and Vanier. They did not have accessible vehicles in their fleets. So in 2001, I guess the first year of following amalgamation, council approved the release of 25 accessible taxi cab plate holder licenses in Ottawa. We often refer to these licenses as plates, quote unquote. They are affixed to an accessible vehicle so that it may operate legally. Sorry, I was just a little distracted by we're actually, just to clarify for people, we're not on the PowerPoint as yet. That's specifically about this. What I'm giving you right now is just sort of the historical stuff. It's not in the slides, so I just thought I'd mention that. And we're happy to provide it in another way if you like, or if you have questions at the end as well. So let's go back to where I was, because I was totally distracted by the popping up of the PowerPoint. Anyway, so we often refer to these as plates. They're affixed to an accessible vehicle so that it may operate legally as such after the vehicle and its driver or drivers meet the requirements of the bylaw. In 2002, the process, specifically a lottery and then an accessible priority list, was approved for the allocation of accessible plates, resulting in the release of additional accessible taxi cab plates in 2003. The holders of these accessible taxi cab plates were permitted to transfer the license after 5 years and to have additional drivers on the plate. And the reason for that, the additional drivers, is so that they can provide service longer, because you can't work 24 hours a day, so they'd have more than one driver on a vehicle, a plated vehicle, so that they were available 24/7. In 2005, when the regulations of the 6 former municipalities were harmonized into one single bylaw, council approved the issuance of 40 new accessible taxi cab plates annually, starting in 2006 until the end of 2009, for a total of 185 accessible taxi cab plates to be in service by 20. A formula for the calculation of the required number of plates based on population was embedded in the bylaw, along with the requirement for a minimum number of accessible vehicles based on fleet size. By the end of 2006, a total of 65 accessible plates were in service. So we can issue them, but they need time, the plate holder licensees need time to purchase a vehicle and so on and so forth. In those days, they actually had to be converted as well, which is as much of an issue, but it's still, it's still a cost. Anyway, so time was required, as I mentioned, to obtain the necessary specialized vehicles and meet all the requirements of both the bylaw and the provincial accessible vehicle standards. Excuse me, and then all the plate holders, which is still the case now, they also have to be a licensed driver. In 2007, there were quite a number of amendments made to the bylaw, but I'll focus more on the ones that are related of interest to this group. Further amendments to the then taxi bylaw were introduced to ensure reliable on-demand accessible taxi cab service to persons with mobility challenges, including the requirement for accessible drivers to be on the road 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, to ensure that a minimum number of accessible cabs remained in service at all times. Excuse me, I was going to add something to that and I forgot what it was. So I'll just carry on, it might come back to me. Yes, the other point that's important is I guess our consultant found that there's about 1% of all the fares provided by taxi cabs in Ottawa are on demand, as opposed to the pre-scheduled para-transport fares. But even so now, and in those days, that's quite a while ago now, the accessible vehicles, they're still allowed to pick up standard fares, because there's not enough business for them to cover the costs of operating an accessible vehicle just based on accessible fares alone. So in 2012, of the 185 accessible taxi cab plates approved for release, 173 were claimed by qualified drivers and were in service. Based on a very low number of complaints and anecdotal information, Ottawa's on-demand accessible taxi cab service appeared to meet the community needs. As well, business partnerships with Paratranspo were augmenting public transportation options for residents with disabilities while creating efficiencies for the city. With that, and the 2007 bylaw amendments, which placed more onus on the taxi brokers to ensure reliable, accessible service, there seemed to have been a significant improvement in reliability. Also, as of 2012, any new plates issued as a result of application of the formula that I mentioned earlier would be accessible. So we're no longer, and since 2012, we're no longer issuing any standard plates. So we're at 1,001 standard plates, and that won't change. The only thing that might change that is there is provision in the bylaw to have to convert a standard plate to an accessible plate. By 2016, which was the last major review of the bylaw, where we hired KPMG, which the consultant had also done a consultation with the then Accessibility Advisory Committee. So by 2016, when the formula was updated as a result of the KPMG review, so obviously it's based on population, and there were population changes, and a subsequent report to council, the number of accessible plates that could be issued totaled 191. And that's where we are at right now, 191 that we could potentially issue. The issue that we're dealing with now is that they're not all in operation. So we'll talk about that shortly. So fast forward to now, 2023, much has happened that has negatively impacted the taxi industry generally, but on-demand accessible service in particular. Service has suffered. BLS, or bylaw, recognizes that the accessible taxi service for Ottawa residents, their families and visitors using mobility devices and other disabilities has been substandard in recent years. We're totally aware of that, which is why we undertook, with council's obviously direction and approval, we undertook this study that we're going to talk about today. It has also been recognized that holders of accessible taxi cab plates bear significantly higher costs than holders of standard plates, as in higher vehicle and maintenance costs, to name but two. They make a large financial investment in their business. The taxi industry has indicated they too want to get their accessible taxis back on the road to provide better service to users, and are looking for solutions to the rising and additional costs associated with accessible vehicles, including vehicle and conversion costs, often $100,000 and up for a fully wheelchair accessible vehicle, and additional costs associated with repairs and maintenance of accessibility related parts such as ramps. Further, the 10-year age limit, which is in place now for all types of vehicles for hire in the current bylaw, it is limiting plate holders and drivers' interest in getting back on the road, as many purchased vehicles in 2012, so they're debating whether to purchase a new one. In addition, the pandemic has changed the face of the industry, and it has changed many other things as well. Specifically, it has contributed to drivers' ability to operate given fewer fares available, and as a result, those still driving do so with only one driver per plated vehicle, unlike the multiple drivers on one vehicle of previous years, meaning that they're not available as long as the hours of coverage aren't as long. Currently, of the 191 accessible plates that could be operating, only about 100 are on the road, with 60 or so of those also working on paratranspo, which many of you are likely aware if you're, pardon me, users of it. Those are all pre-scheduled fares. Enforcement efforts, either in response to complaints or as part of focused programs, have not been sufficient to improve the availability and quality of service, in part because vehicles have to be in service for enforcement to be effective. So, on to the study. The city commissioned this study with the goal of getting the current 191 plates back on the road and ultimately improving service for the accessible community. The city is also prepared to make further investments by leveraging the Vehicle for Hire Accessibility Fund in order to implement the recommendations of the study, if approved by council, which will be discussed later in the presentation. The fund will help augment the availability of accessible taxi services as it was intended, and it will be done without a reduction to the other supports under the fund, which were supported by the former Accessibility Advisory Committee, meaning the taxi coupons and rural transportation and discounted coupons. So yes, sorry, my apologies. We're also consulting with other disability stakeholders on May 30th through the Ottawa Disability Coalition, which includes representation from ABLE2, Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Vision Loss, Rehabilitation Ontario, Council on Aging Ottawa, Disability Empowerment Equality Network, the Guillain, I'm going to probably say this wrong, the Guillain-Barré Syndrome, Chronic Inflammatory Demyelinating Polyneuropathy Foundation of Canada. I know how to say that because my brother has it. Health Transportation Coalition, Huntington Society of Canada, March of Dimes, Multiple Sclerosis Society, Neil Squire Society. I'm sure I'm telling you things that you already know that these groups are involved with the coalition, but Ottawa Carleton Association for Persons with Developmental Disabilities, Ottawa Community Support Coalition, Ottawa Independent Living Resource Center, Parkinson Canada, Eastern Ontario Pathways to Independence, Reach Equality and Justice for People with Disabilities, Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, VHA Health and Home Support, Vista Center Brain Injury Services. We have also invited the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and the National Capital Association for the Deaf. And I'd like to thank, I think, I'm not sure if Lucille, yes, she's on this, and the Accessibility Office for helping us out with hi Lucille, for helping us out with this great resource in the Accessibility Office. So all in all, and I'll turn it over to Kayla in a moment, but this is of interest to not only Bylaw and Regulatory Services, but to the industry as well. They are in it for obviously for different reasons. It's a business, but they want to be able to provide the service just as we do, and just as you would like to receive the service. And I can say, on a personal note, my elderly disabled mother lives with me. She's, I guess, fortunate. She often says that she has somebody to provide supports to her. But I firsthand experience with trying to get transportation for her. So certainly, we all here at Bylaw sympathize, and we want to fix this, and actually the industry does as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kayla to provide an overview of the service study. I don't know if there are any members on this committee who have been here before. Were here previously. The consultant did meet with the committee in 2021 when he was working on this, and so now we're reporting back on his findings. So over to you, Kayla. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and hello, everybody. So we can start with slide 2, if you don't mind. Okay, so to just jump on the background that Christine provided, in 2019, Council approved the Vehicle for Hire Accessibility Fund allocation plan, which recommended provision of funds to not-for-profit and community agencies to expand accessible transportation services in rural areas, a reduction in the cost of taxi coupons, and an increase in the maximum allowance of taxi coupons per customer. Later in 2019, Council considered a staff report relating to a bylaw review work plan and approved a number of amendments to the taxi-related provisions of the Vehicle for Hire bylaw that streamed the taxi licensing and inspection process to facilitate their operation and in turn improve availability and quality of service. At that time, Council also directed staff to review the feasibility of a study of on-demand accessible taxi cab service, and subsequently approved the retention of a consultant to undertake such a study, which has since been conducted. The consultant, as part of his process, conducted extensive research, benchmarking, and discussions with the taxi industry stakeholders, Paratranspo, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and individual accessible service users who had previously contacted the city, culminating in a final report to staff with recommendations. Staff, as part of their development of its report, has circled back with those same stakeholders to identify the consultant's recommendations and solicit feedback. In addition to those stakeholders, staff will also be meeting with the Ottawa Disability Coalition in the coming weeks, as Christine noted. The on-demand accessible taxi cab service study staff report will be going to committee and council in June, and will center around the study and a few other items that will facilitate improvement of taxi service, as well as to provide an update on the Accessibility Fund allocation plan. Next slide, please. So following the comprehensive review of options, the environmental scan, and the stakeholder discussions, the consultant's recommendations to the city or for the city to consider are the first one being developing a request for proposals for the purposes of awarding a centralized dispatch contract respecting on-demand wheelchair accessible vehicles to a third-party vendor for a 3-year period. The goal of this recommendation is to increase the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles on the road. The centralized 24/7 dispatch would be available via a dedicated third-party administered app, website, and telephone number. The centralized wheelchair accessible vehicle dispatch would also ensure that all requests for wheelchair accessible vehicles are routed through a dedicated app, website, telephone number, and dispatched to the closest available wheelchair accessible vehicle to the benefit of both the client and the driver. The contract would be administered by the city under specified criteria, including data retention and reporting requirements. The second recommendation is to implement an annual monetary incentive plan that recognizes the higher costs of owning and operating a wheelchair accessible vehicle, with the goal, again, of increasing the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles on the road. Both plate holders and drivers would be eligible for this. Plated holders who are also drivers would be eligible to receive both incentives, and there would be an overall upset limit per incentive. The third recommendation is to implement a per trip levy of $15 paid to the driver for each completed wheelchair accessible fare. This recognizes that the higher costs and time requirements that are associated with accessible calls and incentivizes drivers to treat such calls as a priority. These recommendations are intended to improve the availability, the timeliness, and the overall quality of on-demand accessible service. Funds to cover these recommendations would come from the Vehicle for Hire Accessibility Fund, derived from the voluntary accessibility surcharge to private transportation companies. Next slide, please. So although a number of taxi industry concerns were raised with staff previously have already been addressed, either through bylaw amendments or administratively, where lawful and feasible, there remain others that were identified both with staff and during the consultants' discussions with stakeholders that are being reviewed as part of the staff report. The industry requests being reviewed include accessible plate holder license transfer fee reduction, the reduction or elimination of the 5-year non-transferability of accessible plate holder licenses to facilitate a transfer between the plate holders relinquishing plates and new ones coming online, the accessible vehicle age increase from the current 10 years to 12 years, and the reconsideration of the minimum service requirement set out in the current Vehicle for Hire bylaw that requires accessible drivers to be on the road for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. Just wanted to note, though, that during our consultations, staff have learned that this was a misinterpretation of the bylaw, where the industry thought the 10 hours must be consecutive. That's not the case. The bylaw actually states that they must be on the road for a total of 10 hours a day, which means that drivers may choose to distribute those hours at different times of day, such as during peak hours. Next slide, please. So if approved by council, the funds to cover the associated expenditures would come from the Vehicle for Hire Accessibility Fund, derived from the voluntary per trip accessibility surcharge to private transportation companies, and would be in addition to the 3 initiatives in the Vehicle for Hire Accessibility Fund. Allocation plan, which was already approved by council in 2019 in support of accessible transportation, as mentioned earlier. The upcoming staff report will also provide an update on the allocation plan. After reviewing the experiences of the other cities researched by the consultant, who believe his recommendations will make a positive difference for members of this community. So we are looking for your feedback on these recommendations to reinvigorate and improve the accessible taxi cab services here in Ottawa. And it is our opinion that these recommendations, if approved, will provide an increase in the much needed availability of service to residents and will increase accountability and responsiveness to the accessible taxi service requests. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, if there's no more to present on this, I'll open the floor to questions. Starting with Adam.
Chair, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
There are a few registered speakers. That being said, the first registered speaker is Phil Silcutt, and I'm not seeing him online. So the second speaker is just being added to the meeting right now as a panelist, Grace McClellan Kraut.
I really dislike your history because to me, the history of wheelchair accessible.
I think it's gone. Okay, can you hear us now? Hello?
Hello? Hi.
Yes, you're coming through. It's
Yeah,
a
I
little
can hear
bit
you.
garbled, but we can hear you.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you for allowing me to speak. I strongly disagree with your history of wheelchair accessible cabs in Ottawa. I have been involved in it for 40 years. In 1985, Transport Canada gave $1 million to taxis in Ottawa so that they would become wheelchair accessible. It was paid out in $85,000 allotments. Blue Line got 5 of them. And Ottawa was to oversee this seed money and make sure that we had wheelchair accessible cabs. The cabs were bought. Nobody could ever get them. Then the driver said, listen, we're not driving anybody. No, they couldn't because they were always off the road. The driver was sick. So we couldn't get the cabs. And then what did they do? Ottawa said, oh, we'll let you take those licenses we gave you and convert them to sedans. And you have done that a number of times. And that is one of the reasons that the taxi drivers think that that is the way to get into the taxi business. They don't want, and I've talked to a number of them, they don't want to provide access to the disabled. I did a survey. I am an ex-consultant on transportation and disabled issues. I did a survey of 25 communities across Canada. I looked at the availability of the taxis, the sturdiest mix. And by the way, the ones that the Ottawa taxi drivers use are put on a car chassis and they're the most expensive to maintain. So don't feel sorry for the taxi drivers. If you don't buy quality, you're going to pay for it. The vans cause problems to many people's health. The characteristics of profitable drivers are not reflected in the drivers here in Ottawa. And I'll tell you why. The first characteristic is dependability. And we have been left high and dry numerous times. We get someplace, we can't get home. If it's a snowstorm, if it's August 1st holiday, it's serious. And they don't care. And there wasn't a single taxi available to bring us home. And the city of Ottawa did nothing when we contacted them. And they admitted a year later they'd taken no action. So the city has to step up and take action. Secondly, it is advantageous, like Vancouver Taxi Company, to have one number, you call it or email it, and every taxi they have is wheelchair accessible. And therefore, they are responsible to make sure that there are wheelchair accessible cabs 24/7, because we don't have that now. Drivers all over Canada told me there were benefits to driving the disabled. They had more business than the sedans. They started the week with more trips booked. And if they were waiting to a call, they always got called before the taxis ahead of them who were driving ambulatory people. Drivers make more money if the accessible taxis are used by the non-disabled people. And in the places where they make more money, they are used by college and university students to move. They are used by salespeople. They are used by musicians to move drum sets, harps, and double basses and such. But you know what? I asked somebody at the NAC one night when I was waiting for Para, are you waiting for a taxi? And the person said, oh no, they're not dependable. I make a private arrangement. So the guys are hurting themselves. And they're used by offices. Now, the other thing is that if you want people to use taxis, they have to be comfortable. And a lot of the taxis that Paratranspo has taken on are not comfortable because you're not sitting level. You're sitting with your feet up higher than your back. And as you go bump, 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 you keep coming down on your back and it gives you back trouble. And I don't think the city should approve any taxis like that. There are two kinds of taxis. There are the back-loading ones and there are the side-loading ones. And the drivers all across Canada told me, you don't need, you can take, for a couple $100, you get this little ramp that's portable and use it. And don't waste your money on mechanization. So, you know, the taxis here in Ottawa like to waste their money. And the last thing is, I am very upset that you've allowed Paratranspo to use so many taxis and we can't get them. And at present, I'm being denied medical services this winter because I couldn't take a wheelchair taxi, get a wheelchair accessible taxi to get to a doctor's appointment on short notice. And there were times when I wanted my husband to follow me to hospital. He can't get a wheelchair accessible taxi and he can't get Paratranspo at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it is serious. It's affecting my health and it's your fault. City of Ottawa's fault.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you get all that?
I did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm her husband and I'm second on the list, or third, I guess. I'm the next speaker. My name is Robert. I'll use the same entry point if I may.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I thank you for the presentation, but under no circumstances should you allow a 12-year limit on a cab. That's 100,000 kilometers a year. You're getting in a vehicle that's that old, it's unsafe. I don't care what anybody tells you. What my wife was referring to is the balance and leveling of the seats of the location where the chairs are in the back of the cab. When a cab, you're over the rear axle, you're sitting in a 12-year-old car, you know what that feels like. So anybody in their right mind would not accept that. The costs for retrofitting a van can be expensive, but you can get them fully equipped from Toyota for 80 grand. So I don't know where their numbers are coming from. The other issues that you have is you have a lot of licenses for accessible cabs, but you've given them all over to Para. When we made our presentation to Para many moons ago, what we suggested and recommended was that cabs would be used for the overflow of Para.
To keep it running.
But you have not kept up with the numbers required for Para. And as such, you've taken all the cabs because you're too cheap to buy the buses. That's another problem. Now based on your numbers, you only have 40 accessible wheelchair cabs in Ottawa at any one time. How many of those are running 24/7? Life does not end 9 to 5. It is very hard to get a cab in this city at odd times. We were at the General, for God's sakes, and they had to have people outside directing traffic because there weren't enough cabs of any kind available. So you have a big problem on your hands, and any consultant who tells you you're doing a great job is giving you the gears. I'm kind of really concerned at the feasibility studies you're doing because the numbers just do not make any sense. If you're going to have all these 40 cabs for on demand, that is not a 24-hour system. And you know yourself, if you need a cab, you need a cab. The other additional problem is Para is already 45 minutes late, considered to be on time, even though they may not show up. The cabs now are doing the same thing. That's over an hour for an on-demand cab. That is not acceptable. And I don't know where this is happening from, but it seems that Ottawa just really does not want to support the disabled.
You've been from sea to sea.
This is just another example of abusing the disabled. When they allowed Lyft and Uber, they had no regulations to follow at all. Go ahead, get a car and start driving people around. But the cabbies still have all the rules and regulations that they have to follow. So until you get your act together, you can say you got a few cents from each one of those rides from Uber, but that's not going to make up the difference. The cabbies will just say, why the hell do I have to work here when I can go take my own car and run it around for nothing? So you have a big job on your hands, and I wish you well. I would also request a copy of that brief historical review, and I'd like a copy of the actual report, if that's possible. Thank you.
Eric, is there anybody else?
Chair, no one else on the list, and I'm not seeing Philip Tsofkat either. That being said, I see that Anna Maria has her hand up. I'm not sure if that's a question for the delegations or for staff.
I will say this on simple. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maria, before you start, can I just say something before you start? I wanted to say to Grace and Robert, thank you very much for bringing your concerns to the committee. You spoke with passion and honesty. We hear you. And I understand why you're so passionate about it, because I've seen everything you've said firsthand with friends of mine. So I just want to tell you, thank you very much.
Can you speak up a little louder, please?
Okay, so I'll speak a little louder. Can you hear me now, Robert? Okay,
yeah.
So I just wanted to say to you and your wife, Grace, thank you very much for bringing your concerns to our committee. You spoke with passion and honesty. We have heard your concerns. We are listening. And I have seen firsthand through friends much of what you have said. So I just want to say before Anna Marie starts that we really sincerely appreciate you raising these concerns with our committee. Okay, go over to you, Anna Maria.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to city staff as well as the presenters that talked about the issue of transportation for disabled people with great passion. I know firsthand that this is a crisis here. And I think the crisis, I agree with them, that has been exacerbated by in general for the taxis, by Uber. Having said that, I think we have to face the reality that we're facing a tremendous crisis in the taxi for these people with disabilities. And in some cases, people have to wait up to 2 hours. In one case, I couldn't drive myself. I just one way, and after that, I have to ask friends to come and beg us to take me home. Because sometimes you don't want to put on your friends, you don't want to bother them all the time. So perhaps, I don't know if us as a committee, we can take a lead, something similar to what we did with the scooters project, to see how we can work more actively on this, on transportation, because in general transportation, city taxis, accessible taxis, well, paratransport are very difficult to access, and the waiting time is strenuous, and it increases the how to say, the frustration, and you don't know where to turn. So I don't know, it's something that we have to take in consideration and take perhaps more seriously, because it's a crisis that is not getting any better, it's getting worse. So that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. And I'll move to Holly next.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. A lot to reflect on, both from what Grace and Robert said, as well as Anna Maria. Now, I think we are absolutely facing sort of a conglomerate of different issues happening in Ottawa and other cities when it comes to getting staffed appropriately for these types of positions, as well as when it comes to making sure that the needs that it was desired to actually do, was intended for, are actually met. By that I mean the concerning things that they're saying about their experiences with Grace and Robert, and also Anna Maria, with the long waits with taxis that take other fares and not the people with disabilities, because as a person who does have an assisted device, we do take longer to load in and load out of a vehicle. And if somebody's just trying to rush from fare to fare, that might mean that we get passed over, right? I really like the city's idea of an incentive. I think that's one way to do it. I'm wondering about, and this is a question for our presenters, about what are we doing to ensure that the taxis are servicing the populations it's intended for? Speaking about our stewardship to our taxpayers, right? We're spending a lot of money on this as taxpayers. Our money's going towards this. Let's make sure it's working to the best of its ability. Second, I'm also even wondering about any type of training for people who are dealing with, we have a growing population of people, not only elderly, but people with disabilities. The two often go hand in hand as we get older. So this will become more of a need, not less of one, moving into the future. And then as there are other ways to increase that accountability, to ensure that, again, the community intended to benefit from this and to increase mobility. And I, as a person who cannot use taxis because I cannot trust a stranger with my care, how can we do this to really help the people in need, to help the Grace Roberts of the world, to help the Annas, to help the Hollies, etc. Beyond these incentives? I think accountability is a really key piece in that. My concern, of course, is that, as Anna was saying, and quite rightly so, is that other less regulated areas like Uber companies will take advantage of that, saying, well, we don't have those regulations, we don't have to adhere to that, so come with us, right? We'll offer whatever discounts, or we'll do this. And how do we therefore actually protect our citizens in being able to service them appropriately and offer them a very important part, mobility? I say that as we see, because again, there's this different intersection, right? When it comes to healthcare, a lot of places have closed down in the city that we used to be able to access. So that means we have to go even further out to get healthcare. As people with disabilities, there's a higher need for healthcare. And we now have yet even greater, unfortunately, hardship of having to travel further often, longer wait times because of the crisis we have in medical staffing. Therefore, the need for something like this is extremely high. Right, so those are my thoughts. Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation as well. Really appreciate it because it's very important.
Thank you, Holly. Eric, I have a few comments, but I noticed that Grace's hand was still up, but I'm not sure if Grace still wanted to speak.
Yes,
Sure,
I would.
Chair, if
Okay.
I may, it sounds like the committee is gravitating more toward discussion and question to staff. So the committee is in your hands in terms of whether you wish to continue with public discussion or close public discussion and proceed and continue with the questions and deliberations to staff.
So I think this is a very important issue, and I'd like to give Grace perhaps a 2-minute window just to interject, and then at that point we'll move it back to committee.
We have used taxis from sea to sea, and why we have the pictures to show for it. And there's a completely different attitude in other cities. They feel it's right, and the taxi companies, I've talked to the taxi companies and the drivers, and they feel we have a right to have taxis. The ones here in Ottawa don't want a service. Now, the when I talk to taxi drivers across the country, I talk to the companies, the dispatch, the users, and the taxi drivers. And the taxi drivers all said that they had more rides. Yes, it takes longer sometimes to hook us up, but not always that much. But they just had more rides, but they were dependable. And that is a big issue here. And I just want to tell you, I've had my life threatened twice by Ottawa's taxi drivers. The first time when I went down and advocated for wheelchair accessible cabs, and the city of Ottawa refused to do anything because I didn't have proof. Apparently I should have known enough to tape the guy ahead of time that he was going to threaten me. Well, I didn't know that. So, you know, Ottawa has to stand up and be willing to stand up for we disabled people. And I'm sorry, but I have had very bad results with the city. I've made complaints about non-service, and they say a year later, oh no, I haven't looked into that. Well, when you're left at a winter storm, a mile from home or something, and no taxi and no way to get home, that's serious. That's life-threatening. And Ottawa doesn't think it's important enough to look into. I have no patience, and I do not believe that you will ever be able to get this working. I'm sorry to say, because I've made so many of these presentations, and it just keeps getting from bad to worse. And my husband tried to talk me out of talking tonight because he said, you're wasting your energy.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the additional views that you've shared, Grace. And is there anybody else, Eric, that you can see who has their hand up? I just don't want to take anybody else's spot before I interject as well with a few comments of my own.
I'm not seeing any other hands up, Chair.
Okay, great. So I do have a couple more things to raise. And first of all, I'll just say that this issue, as Grace mentioned, is not new whatsoever. And I would probably echo others' comments that we are in crisis in terms of accessible taxis and access to them. And it's only gotten worse, I think, with Uber. And I feel that now is the time for a change, and we have an opportunity here to action that. A couple of things I want to say. So I've also raised the issue of accessible taxis in the past, and even though they're supposed to be, you know, as somebody said, I think 40 on the road at any given time. I recall sitting with somebody on a Sunday night waiting for a taxi at Lansdowne, and it had been over 2 hours, and the person on the line said that there was only one accessible taxi operating in the city at that moment in time, which is why the wait just continued. But it becomes a health issue if somebody's maybe they need to get home for certain healthcare services. Or maybe they've just gotten off a train ride and they've been waiting for hours for a taxi, and they need to get home for various medical reasons. So that's one thing. The other thing is in terms of, say, Uber, I've heard of Uber drivers coming and seeing somebody may have a seeing eye dog and they just drive off. So also having accessible taxis for somebody who's blind who has a seeing eye dog is very important. And then as well, I just wanted to say in terms of equity, we need to make sure that the cost of taking an accessible taxi is on par with somebody who might not need an accessible taxi is paying for Uber. And then finally, I want to say that the time to get a vehicle fit up with a ramp, as well as the time and cost of maintenance is significant, and that needs to be taken into account. But this all to say, I do understand people's passion in speaking on this, because it really is a health issue more than anything. And I think there's a duty of care on the part of the city to act on it. So those are my comments for now. Thank you. So Eric, did the presenters want an opportunity to respond? Roger, I see your camera on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to get off mute here. So yes, I'd appreciate an opportunity to make a couple comments. Again, thank you very much. I really appreciate the feedback and the passion that's it's being expressed here today. To be quite honest, I think we said in the presentation, the system's failed for the accessible community, and it's not something that we're proud of either. There's a bunch of things that have happened over the last several years that have, led us down this road. And again, truly, it's not something that we're proud of. It's we've made the attempt with enforcement, but enforcement fails when you don't have the vehicles on the road to provide the service. And this is the reason why we engaged with a consultant to provide some feedback, some recommendations going forward to improve the service, but also to do some benchmarking across not just the province of Ontario, but also across Canada, to see how other municipalities are working through some of these challenges. Because I can tell you that I've spoken to my colleagues, and we're not unique in here in Ottawa. I mean, other municipalities are experiencing the same challenges right now. But I do truly believe that, as I've heard what everybody has said here today, and this, the first recommendation that we showed today or presented today is that, the dedicated dispatch service, we think will be, to change the environment here. It's a GPS system is what we're going to require, that, when a call comes in, it's for fully accessible vehicles only. The closest fully accessible vehicle to that call will be sent. There's no question about who the driver pops up on the screen. That's the one that's sent to the call. And if they don't go to the call, that's when we take enforcement action. But at the same time, we still have to make some changes here to make it financially feasible for the operators to put the vehicles back on the road. And that's our challenge right now. I'm hearing that there's 40 vehicles on the road or whatever. I just to clarify that point, we do have 100 fully accessible vehicles that are plated and on the road right now. We should have closer to 200 vehicles on the road. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is to get those other vehicles back on the road. So we think that, by providing these incentives, the $15 per trip levy, the incentive to purchase and convert the vehicles to help with that cost, as well as providing that dedicated dispatch service, we really believe that this will improve the service to the accessible community dramatically.
Thanks, Roger. There's one more thing that I want to ask. So during the presentation, let me just go back up here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling up. Christine, when you were giving your presentation, you had talked about You've thrown out some numbers, 185 accessible taxi cab plates, getting 191 plates back, 91 plates back on the road. But I didn't see those numbers in the material that the committee was provided. I'm wondering if we could just have like a one-pager provided that has all those key figures and stats for us, and also just kind of a comparison of like number of plates and active plates and maybe time of the week compared to, say, the population of Ottawa. Because I know we're now like over 1 million people, and so, you know, is that commensurate with other regions that have that level of population compared to the number of accessible plates on the road?
Based on Ottawa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, what I would suggest is this might be a good opportunity for us to meet with you, you know, sometime in the next week or so, and we can go over some of this information. And yes, I mean, the answer to your question is yes, we can provide a one-pager on, you know, some of the data that's been collected, you know, that we've collected through some of the data collection that we're permitted to do through the bylaw with the brokers. Also, some of the data that the consultant has collected, and we can provide some of that background as well. More importantly, the number of accessible cabs that are on the road at any time during the day, we can help with some of that to provide some understanding of the situation, the current situation. So we can put a briefing note or something together for you to circulate to the rest of the members.
I think we have a couple of hands up. I see Hannah put her hand up first, and then Wayne.
Thank you for the information. I guess my question is, out of those accessible cabs that are on the road, you said there's about 100. How many of those are actually being used by paratransport, right? Because there's a number of them that are being used by paratransport, which is also creating the lack of accessible cabs that are not paratransport. So in that one-pager brief, will those numbers be identified?
Madam Chair, it's a great question. And yes, we can provide that data. I mean, currently what we're seeing is anywhere between 50 and 60 of those accessible cabs on a daily basis are working on paratransport fares.
Okay, and then Wayne. Wayne, I don't know if you're on mute. We don't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Okay,
great. Thank you for the presentation. Clearly, though, I mean, it's clear, especially from say Grace and Robert's presentation and from other comments here, that we are in a crisis situation. And I've heard some numbers thrown around too, and I'm trying to get my head around it. Is there any way? Two questions actually I have. First, you mentioned there's 100 plates for fully accessible vehicles operating, but is there any way of ensuring that there's a certain number operating at all times? And I'm thinking of people, let's say late at night, and those late at night calls are usually health related, or a lot of times they are. I've heard stories of people trying to get a taxi 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and not being able to get one. So I'm not sure if I heard anything in your presentation to ensure that there is a minimum number of accessible vehicles operating at any given time in the city. That's my first question, if you want to.
Sure, I can answer that. So, Madam Chair, so the only requirement in the bylaw currently is that they're on the road 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. And understanding that, you know, there are some challenges late in the evening, early in the morning, you know, with the amount of cabs, fully accessible cabs that we have on the road now, there is challenges in providing that service, that on-demand service during those hours. So that's great feedback. That's something we'll take back and review now and see what we can do to provide some assurance that there will be on-demand cabs available at those times of the night.
Yeah, because that to me, that what I heard doesn't address that issue. I mean, I don't know if you want to look at things like increased incentives for people to operate late at night, or you know, making requirements for the taxi companies, the larger ones, to make sure there's a certain number of vehicles operating at all times. And my second question involves, I never heard much about Uber and Lyft and any other rideshare services that operate in Ottawa. Is there any requirement based on those companies? I mean, Ottawa does allow Uber to operate, allows a Lyft to operate. Is there any requirement on those companies to make sure they have a certain number of accessible vehicles? I know with Uber, they used to have Uber Assist, but I've heard that that doesn't work that well now. They had a certain number of vehicles dedicated for accessible passengers that need certain accessibility accommodations. But I don't know if the city requires that, or what is the arrangement with Uber and Lyft in this regard, because they're also a key component of on-demand rides.
Madam Chair, again, a very good question. There is no legislative requirement that enables the municipality to impose conditions in our bylaws to require rideshare companies providing fully accessible service. So in lieu of that, we did enter into negotiations with both companies that provide transportation services here in Ottawa, Lyft and Uber, and both companies have agreed to a 10-cent per trip surcharge that the city retains, and that's used to subsidize anything that council approves to provide better accessible service here in Ottawa. And that's where we're getting the money from to provide these incentives to the taxi industry to be able to provide the service.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused though, because the city, I know of cities that don't allow Uber to operate, so the city must have some regulations when they allowed Uber to operate in the city. Like, can the city pull Uber's license or Lyft's license, for instance, or is it just like the Wild West, they can just operate anyway?
No, sorry, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. There are regulations for Uber and Lyft. We do regulate those transportation companies. But again, we can only regulate what the province through the Municipal Act or other enabling legislation, we can only regulate what's provided to us by the province. And unfortunately, the province has not provided any enabling legislation that would allow us to provide provisions in our bylaw that would require that Uber and Lyft type companies provide fully accessible services.
Okay, thanks.
Before going on to Adele, Roger, can I just get you to repeat to me the requirement in the bylaw currently on the road? You said something, I forget exactly how you worded it. And just speak slowly if that's okay.
Sorry, so the current provisions of the vehicle power bylaw requires that fully accessible vehicles, taxi cabs, are on the road minimum of 10 hours per day, 5 days a week.
Oh, okay. That's not great, I'll be honest. Okay, so, but thank you for sharing that, Roger. Sorry about my reaction. It's a reaction based on what I've seen in the past. It's explaining a lot of the issues I've seen in the past. So it's not you, it's more just the whole situation. Okay, Adele.
My question is, we've been talking about supply, and I wonder, has anybody looked at the demand side of it and the amount of unmet demand, like unmet needs? Has there been a study done to determine what the extent of the problem are there certain times when it's more of a problem than others? So yeah, talking about the number of people with disabilities, number of seniors who require accessible transportation, how are their needs being not met?
Madam Chair, again, very good question. I can tell you that the data that we've obtained shows that there's about approximately 1,000 calls for on-demand taxi cab service per month. So about 12,000 fares a year. And quite frankly, one of those not receiving timely on-demand service is too many, as far as I'm concerned. And right now we're doing some analysis. We've ordered back or requested a bunch of documents from the brokers, and we're reviewing that right now. But quite frankly, one is too many. So if I don't know what the number is, we'll certainly provide that analysis through the chair within the next week or so.
Thank you. Eric, is there any more questions?
I'm not seeing any more members hands raised, Chair.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, I'm really, this has been a great topic to raise at our first meeting. And I would like to thank Roger and others for the presentations and for listening and hearing, because they're two different things. I've certainly heard the concerns and I understand them. And I think that this is not something that's going to be fixed right away, but it can certainly be a huge theme for this committee, and we can hopefully move the needle forward in a significant way during our term. So thanks again to the public for coming forward with your concerns, and we're open to working together and listening some more. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the feedback.
Good evening.
Bye.
Okay, so thanks very much. Next thing on our agenda is Springhurst Park, the dock addition.
Hello, Madam Chair, and thank you for receiving our presentation. Oh, I see it's just coming up. I'll just give it a minute here. So in the interim, my name is Kevin Wary. I'm the manager of Parks and Facilities Planning. You will get a more formal introduction to me, and I believe next month when we do our formal duty to consult meeting, where I report on all of our activities. However, we have a project that's come up to us today where an exception is being requested, and where it's within my purview to grant exceptions, I would never do such without having a conversation with the committee in the first place. It's unfortunate timing, but it has to do with our ability to construct something potentially within a timeline that we are faced with right now versus waiting until a later date. Along with me, I've asked Warren Bedford is here. He's one of my park planning staff. He's the park planner responsible for this project. And I've asked him to prepare a presentation to demonstrate the issue that we're dealing with here. If I could keep it at a high level, sometimes the environment does not help us in providing certain things to be as accessible as they possibly could be. This is one of those examples. It's rare that we come to committee for this. I've been doing this for many years, and I have not brought many forward, but this is one that I asked to come forward for a fruitful discussion with AAC in order to perhaps get some consideration as to whether or not we've considered everything we need to consider. Warren, please take it away. And thank you for your time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Chair, and members of the committee, new and any returning members. First, just confirming, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
At least
Okay,
on my
great.
side.
Great, thank you. My presentation will be in English today. However, we do have a French version of the presentation prepared, and be happy to take any comments, advice, feedback in either English or French at the end of the presentation. But in French, we'll have to come back with a reply a little bit later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so this first slide shows the overall concept plan that was developed for the project, which is a dock addition to Springhurst Park. The project was initiated by the community and the councillor for the ward in the summer of 2021. Councillor Menard committed funding from cash in lieu of parkland reserves for the project, which is the design and construction of a dock in Springhurst Park for the launching of non-motorized watercraft, such as canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards onto the Rideau River. The dock is proposed to be located where the community currently accesses the Rideau River through a beaten path, if you will, a dirt trail leading down to the water's edge from Springhurst Park. The design of the dock will be like those found in Bordelot Park, Brantwood Park, Windsor Park, and Brewer Park, which are other parks along the Rideau River, which the city has installed docks in previously. And the dock will be connected to the existing asphalt trails within the park with a new accessible asphalt surface. The necessary permits have already been obtained from government agencies involved, so the Conservation Authority and the Ministry of Northern Development and Parks Canada. Next slide. We will be expanding the area of the dock in a future slide, so it'll be much clearer to be able to see what we're talking about as far as the reason why we're here today. Next slide, please. So I included this slide for the committee, knowing that we have some new members, and so not sure if everybody is familiar with the city's public consultation process. So Engage Ottawa is used for all city projects. For our online public consultations, it's a platform that meets, or where possible exceeds, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, so WCAG 2.1, the Global Web Accessibility Standard. Our project, the dock addition to Springhurst Park, the online consultation, it was available from October 21st to November 20th of last fall, which provided residents with the opportunity to provide their feedback on the concept plan that was presented. So from those residents that did provide a response, 94% of the 33 were in favor of the project and indicated that it would be well used and a valuable addition to the community. Many other positive comments were received. The concept plan still remains available for download on the Engage Ottawa platform by searching for Springhurst Park Dock Addition. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a couple of enlargements from the concept plan. So on the left is an example of an existing dock in Brantwood Park, which shows what the proposed dock and ramp would look like for Springhurst Park. And so the image on the right has a blow up showing the ramp and the dock and the measurements of the ramp and the dock, and also shows the asphalt pathway, the new accessible asphalt pathway that will connect to the existing trails within the park. That pathway also will connect to a current existing bench that's currently in a grassed area of the park, and also will provide access to some new bike racks, which will allow users of the ramp and dock and users of the park to lock up things such as the dollies they may use to transport their watercraft from their vehicle or from their homes to the ramps, and as well as, of course, locking up bikes. The two X's that are evident or showing on here are trees that unfortunately have to be removed. One is dead, and as compensation, other trees will be planted in the park. So focusing in on the ramp, which is the reason why we're here today, the ramp shown on the concept plan was designed to meet the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation 191/11 of a 10% maximum slope. However, due to the height of the riverbank in Springhurst Park, designing for that maximum slope results in a ramp that exceeds the 9-meter overall length requirement of the City of Ottawa's accessibility design guidelines. So the dimension shown on the screen underneath the word ramp is 12,000. So that's a measurement in millimeters, so 12 meters, where our design standards suggest anything over 9 meters is too long for a ramp in one section. The dock at the base of the ramp is also larger than our existing docks at other locations, mainly because it's required to support the weight of the ramp at that end. Next slide, please. So now we get into, as Kevin mentioned earlier, some of the reasons why we've initiated this discussion with you this evening. So some of the reasons were that as I was mentioning previously, to meet the IASR standard of 10% maximum slope, the proposed ramp would be 12 meters long or 40 feet, which is 4.5 meters or 15 feet longer than the city's current longest existing ramp, which is 7.5 meters or 25 feet. The dock is also larger than our existing docks by 8 feet longer and 2 feet wider than our typical existing docks. Due to the length of the ramp and the size of the dock, the city will not have enough lifting power using our own crane truck, which is used for seasonal installs and removals of the other docks. So with the proposed dock would require renting specialized equipment, such as a larger crane and a longer trailer, which the city tries to avoid in order to install and remove the dock and the ramp every season. So, and then even if we can install and remove the proposed ramp and dock, transportation of them will also be an issue because the city's vehicle used for transporting our existing docks, for example, has a 24-foot bed, and the longest current ramp is 25 feet. The proposed ramp here for Springhurst Park would therefore be about 16 feet longer than the truck's bed, which, as I mentioned, then would require renting a trailer every season. With larger equipment, accessing the site without causing damage to the park becomes an issue. Getting to the point to being able to bring in the crane and putting out its riggers to stabilize it and lifting the ramp and the dock out, and then being able to exit the park with the ramp and dock. The larger the equipment, the more damage potentially that will be done to the park. We also have storage constraints at our city facilities. They're full, and they would be unable to accommodate the larger ramp and dock. Also, further, an increased reliance on an external contractor means potentially scheduling for a larger crane and truck and trailer may reduce the city's flexibility to accommodate requests for seasonal extensions in the spring and fall from the community. And then finally, due to some existing underground infrastructure that crosses the park adjacent to the Rideau River, being the Springhurst Avenue trunk sewer, we did investigate potentially regrading that portion of the park to bring the access point for the ramp to a lower spot in order to maintain a accessible slope on the ramp. However, due to this sewer, the park can't be regraded at that point. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide for the presentation. And it's just to try and provide some additional context for your review and consideration. We have another project that's underway as well at the same time, which is another dock addition to Dutchess Hole Park, which is 1.5 kilometers away, just to the north. It's showing on the map on the right of your screen. Springhurst Park is in the middle, symbolized with a star. Dutchess Hole just up a little bit, symbolized with a square. The other existing docks are also shown along there in black with a different symbol as well, being Bordelot Park, the furthest north, and then Brantwood, Windsor, and Brewer Parks to the south. And those are the ramps and docks that the city has between Mooney's Bay and the Ottawa River. And so that gets to, as we mentioned at the start of the presentation, the reason why we're here this evening is that our department, RCFS, is requesting the committee's advice regarding an exception to the accessibility requirements for this proposed ramp and dock addition to Springhurst Park, specifically for the slope of the ramp. Thank you for your time and consideration this evening. Kevin and I would be happy to take any of your questions, comments, or feedback at this time. Thank you.
I would just add, sorry, I would just add to Warren's comments that the specific thing we were wishing to discuss here is that we are going to have a ramp that's at a steeper slope. And that is due to the fact that it can't be as long as it needs to be for various physical reasons. Like we can't excavate the shoreline to bring the ramp down because of the trunk sewer system. Pardon me. We can't have it so long that it reaches out too far into the river because that's now something we can't maintain. So the discussion tonight is, in my opinion, is a steeper ramp something that is worthwhile considering here, considering we also have accessible opportunities up and down the river, as Warren demonstrated on his last slide. Or are there other things we should look at? Because for us, there's often a decision between do it or don't do it. And for me, this is one of, we have an opportunity to provide water access, which is an excellent recreational pursuit, especially, this is not motorboat access. This is, the canoe, the kayak, the stand-up paddleboard that was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. We are not looking at boat launching or anything like that. This is, let's call it personal self-propelled watercraft is perhaps the easiest way to explain it. We endeavor, and this will come out in perhaps more in my presentation in June, but we endeavor to always meet every accessibility requirement that we can. This is one of those times when I see that there might be an exception required if we are to proceed with the dock here at all. Those are the end of our comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. I noticed that Will has a question, so we'll move to him.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I was thinking more on the lines of your last point there. I think I've walked in this park quite often, and it does get flooded a lot where water comes up. So if we can't meet the access requirements that we've self-imposed and we have another one 1 kilometer away, we've only assessed interest by 33 people. That's a very small amount. And, we have a bias of more of a good thing is a good thing. So people are going to tend to say yes to that. I strongly am thinking throughout that whole presentation, okay, why? Maybe it's not needed at that site. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I see a hand raised, but I'm not sure if there was a question there for me. You might be muted.
No, Madam Chair, you're still muted.
I think technology is not helping our chair today.
All right. Are you okay, Madam Chair, if I go with my question? Thank you so much.
That's a thumbs up.
Right. So we always find a way. We're nothing if not resourceful as people with disabilities in this room. So yeah, well, I'm just wondering if you can remind me, out of those ones, I remember there was the one particular one that out of the different parks you mentioned, one in particular was accessible. How many out of those that you listed were accessible docking stations?
I will ask Warren to confirm because I think it's all the others, but I will ask Warren to confirm that for me.
Yes, so we'll confirm they were all built to meet the standards at the time that they were put in. I believe Windsor Park, definitely, my understanding, and I haven't been out to see them yet this year. I don't know if they're installed this year to test them, but they certainly would have been built to the standards at the time when they were installed.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'll do is je vais passer la parole Adele, whose hand is up, please.
Does this mean then that if we give the exception, it will not be accessible by people with disabilities at all?
It means it will have a steeper slope than is acceptable. It doesn't mean it's not accessible. It will have a flat surface. It will have railings. It just means that going up and down the ramp will be at a grade that the standard says is too steep. We're not talking 45 degrees steep. I don't know what the level is, Warren, but I believe it was in the neighborhood. Was it 12 degrees? I can't quite recall the specific.
So it depends on the exact length of dock that we are able to, or sorry, the exact length of the ramp that we're able to, that our operations department is able to install and remove. At the current longest ramp that we have, yes, it would be about 13% is what the number came. But if we can add a foot or two or three onto the ramp, then we get a little bit less of a slope, but still more than the 10%.
So through you, Madam Chair, to respond to Adele Fury's comment, it's a question of what is accessible and what isn't accessible. I would say somebody here in a wheelchair would probably need somebody to help them because of the steepness. And that's the best comment I can make, not being a person who's in a wheelchair myself.
A follow-up question then. Is it really needed, this new ramp, given that there are others there and this area has been being used without the ramp?
Through you, Chair. The reason why we're doing this, there was two reasons. It was community request. First of all, we don't go and look for these projects, they come to us. And then as Warren described at the start, there's an existing cattle path, whatever. People are eroding the shoreline because they're already accessing it anyway. This is legitimizing an existing activity that has been happening for quite some time, to the point where grass doesn't grow. It's an eroded, muddy mess that, where we would either look at maybe fencing it off or improving it. Well, the only way to improve it is by doing something that we can actually manage. And that's why we're here to talk about it today.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Adele. Those were really good questions. I'll pass it on. I see Matthew's hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a quick question. So I understand that you can't make the ramp long enough in order to decrease the slope so that it fits the standards. But are you going to make the ramp as long as practical to make this slope as less as practical?
Yeah, that Warren, go ahead, because you already said this, I think.
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Happy to say it again and maybe in a different way. So our current design, which was done using the standards and the requirements for accessibility, we wound up with a 40-foot long ramp, 12-meter long ramp. The longest ramp the city currently has is 24 feet, or about 7.5 meters long. So at that, using a ramp of that size at this location would result in about a 13% slope. We will be working with our colleagues in park operations who do the installations and removals to determine, exactly what length, what weight of ramp they can accommodate with their existing equipment that they're able to install and remove seasonally. So if that's 26, 27, 28, 30 feet, whatever that length is, then that reduces the slope, right, as the ramp gets longer. So through the chair, if that answers your question.
No, that does answer my question. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Oh, and I see that we have Vanya back. Hello,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Hello. Hi, Holly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. So are there any other hands raised? I do have something that I want to ask, but I just want to see.
I have another question, but I'd rather wait since I've already gone once for you to ask yours, Vanya, and then I'll go after you if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Holly. And excuse me, my earphones aren't working, so if you hear anything in the background, it's just my partner cooking. So I want to ask, of the 33 people who, well, I have a couple of questions, but of the 33 who responded and were in favor, did any of them identify as an individual living with a disability or having special accessibility needs? And do we know do we have a general idea of how many people using the space in terms of the percentage would need to use the ramp to be able to get their craft into the water? For example, somebody who's maybe in a wheelchair but kayaks. What's there in terms of safety, both in terms of using the ramp at a certain slope, as well as just safety in terms of life preservers around there? And I'll just say I just went through the process of trying to install a ramp at my house, and I understand the issue in terms of having the great slope and how that can really increase the length of the ramp and the challenges with that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, those are my queries on this. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Holly.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. For your first question, as to the feedback we received through Engage Ottawa, through the platform, I have not looked, to be honest, to see. I don't know if I guess it is included when you register for your comments. That's something I can follow up with to see, but I don't have an answer on that one for you. As far as existing or people using the ramp and the dock, if they're arriving in a wheelchair with a mobility aid, the ramps will be, they're 1.5 meters wide with railings on them to prevent people from falling off the sides, anybody falling off the sides. Users would be required to bring their own personal flotation devices for the craft that they're operating. So we don't supply life jackets or life preservers at any of these locations, as far as I'm aware.
Over to you, Holly.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's more of a reflection and to be transparent with my thoughts on this. Because from what you describe, what is there now is a very uneven terrain that is muddy and therefore slippery, and therefore would be completely inaccessible to someone like me with an assistive device altogether. There are other docks that are accessible, which is great. The changes you propose, while not being able to adhere due to environmental and other reasons you've given, would still make it more accessible than it currently is, but not as accessible as the other docks. I guess my question would be, do I understand all that correctly?
I'm going to interject now. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Warren. You've interpreted correctly, but it occurs to me during this meeting, the former committee and I and my team had a discussion regarding something else being inaccessible. And you brought up something that maybe requires some additional minor intervention on our behalf, and that is appropriate signage. You know, like this is, you know, whether it says, we'll come up with something appropriate, but say steeper slope or something, warning people that as they go down to this dock that they're not going into something that they should regularly expect from the City of Ottawa when it comes to accessibility. That's something that perhaps we should be considering, and that's what I'm thinking as part of this conversation as well. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the table or comments? Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Warren and Kevin, and sorry about the IT issues having.
If I may share, Madam Chair, my laptop had lost its hard drive today, so I'm actually here on a loaner. I totally understand IT issues because I've just lived the worst case scenario today.
Oh, good. Sorry to hear that. Well, thanks for showing up anyways.
That's why I'm in a hat. Anyway, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. So that is the end of our presentations. So now we're going to move on to committee business. But before we start, I noticed that Holly, you've raised your hand, so I'll move to you.
Thanks. No, I just had a question. I guess it maybe goes to Eric as our coordinator for the question of the exception. Is that something we need to put to a vote to our committee? Or is that something that just our discussion in itself helps to give them information to then come back to us?
That'd be up to the committee to decide if they wish to formally express a position or a rationale. Staff have the authority to make the decision in any event, and they're consulting today. So to the extent that the committee's already provided feedback and staff is taking that away, that might be sufficient for the committee's purposes. But again, if there's anything more formal that you'd wish to include in a motion, that would be up to the committee to decide.
Okay, thanks so much, Eric. Just wanted to be clear. I'm back over to you, Madam Chair.
Holly, that was actually like a great question. And maybe I'm wondering, Eric, can you maybe just take 2 minutes and just explain to the committee kind of this? So we've heard these presentations, we've given feedback, they can go back, but as Holly mentioned, you know, there could be a motion for the committee to decide, we could take a position. How does that work? If we could just take 2 minutes for the new members, as well as myself for a refresher.
The different advisory committees take different positions. I'll admit that I'm not totally familiar with the intricacies of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, but in very general terms, there's many ways in which advisory committees may provide feedback. This can be, as we've seen tonight, oral feedback at the meeting. Staff then take that away, incorporate that into their ongoing work and their consultations. Committees may organize written comments to be submitted after the meeting. If they wish to provide that follow-up, they can individually email staff with some of their comments, although this would be less of a consolidation of the committee's opinion and more just individual members weighing in with I'm going to say miscellaneous thoughts. And then there's also the option of, on the more formal end of things, carrying motions at the meeting or adopting a report that's been formally prepared by a working group on behalf of the committee to then be adopted or approved by the committee itself. So there's a range of options in terms of how they may provide feedback, and depending on the issue, it might be more appropriate to use one or another. I see Megan Richards has her hand up. Megan, if you wanted to add, feel free.
Yeah, I was thinking it wouldn't necessarily apply to this type of an exception because I don't think this would go in a formal report to council, but we do know with a lot of the items that are consulted on, such as the clothing donation bylaw and the accessible taxi cab study, that those reports will be considered by committee and council. And in the past, there's when the AAC chooses to submit a written comment, like as a whole, those will be included in those reports under advisory committee comments. So that's another mechanism.
That's a good point, Megan. It's very rare for advisory committees to report directly to standing committees and or council. For example, this would really only typically be done as part of their annual or biannual reporting requirements to report on progress made. So that's something that we'll be talking about later on in the term once the term of council priorities are established and whatnot. But anyway, I'm probably providing a little bit too much detail in that specific example, but it's just to echo what Megan is saying in terms of typically the feedback and the reports would be issued, if there's that level of formality by committee to staff for their consideration, for their incorporation into staff's reporting to committee and council.
Can I add something quickly about motions too, in the way that Carol used to support motions in the past, is that if the committee or committee members have an idea for a motion and provide some sort of a high level overview, then Carol, with support from the accessibility office, can pull that together into the kind of formal formatted template for the committee's consideration as well.
That's helpful. Thank you very much to both you, Megan and Eric. Adele.
The committee came to us asking for an exception. Do we not have to formally say that we agree with it? Or do we want to put some qualifiers on it? I mean, the discussion about we don't know exactly the change in the angle of the ramp. So do we want to address that? It seems to me we had a discussion, but we didn't say to them, yeah, we agree that you should go ahead with the exception.
May I say something?
So I'm not sure who had their hand up first. I think it was Anna Maria, and then we can move to the second.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Following Adele, personally, I kind of satisfied with the last part of the last comment. They are going to make signage that will say that the slope is not the regular standard that we according to the code that you are set for accessibility that is DPIT. So if they have the signage and is creating awareness and education, so to me that is acceptable, and perhaps we can accept that exception. So with that provision that there will be plenty of information and plenty of signage. So when you go there, you know what are you facing. Because it's not only a deep slope for people with wheelchair, but also for seniors. It's harder to walk when the slope is so deep, you know. Keep in mind with, you know, you get more tired and so on. So, but if the plenty of the signage and the public is informed, I go along with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ana Maria. Moving to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate what Eric was saying earlier, that where it comes to exceptions, it is the responsibility of the manager, who is Kevin, to make the final decision on whether the city will risk, take that risk as far as not meeting the standard. And therefore, he has come to you today to seek advice on whether or not the committee itself thinks that it's a good idea because of that risk to people with disabilities in not meeting a standard. And therefore, it is up to you how you would like to, like you have already spoken to them, and you've already given your comments, and they can take those comments away already and work with that for their exception, or as Eric said, you can be more formal or not, depending on how you feel about the specific project that he's proposing, or the exception that he's proposing.
That was really helpful, Lucille. Okay, and moving to you, Will.
In that case, then I would explicitly say that I don't think that building at this location would be necessary, considering there's one that is closer, that's very close by.
So I'm just wondering, Eric, if you can give some advice in terms of what we do now. So like, should we go around the committee and say whether, because I see like three possible options. Either we let them go back and do the exception, or we take a view as a committee in terms of, yes, we would endorse moving forward, or we do not endorse. So I'm just wondering if you have some advice for me as the chair in terms of what we do now at this point.
I see that Caitlin's joined the call, but I'm not sure. Caitlin, did you want to speak to this, or?
Sure, Eric, thank you. And in the theme of technical difficulties, I had to rejoin from my phone and my camera won't turn on. So as it stands, the committee has provided to Mr. Wery and his team comments of individual members, both in favor and opposed to this particular exception for him to take away. Should the committee wish to take a particular position, a member could move a motion to support this, or move a motion to formally oppose it and have a vote on that. And again, that's if a member wanted to move that, they could. Otherwise, staff will take away those individual comments raised at this meeting and take those under advisement.
Okay, and Will, thank you very much for that. Caitlin.
This is great. You're teaching me all the things to do. So then I would like to formally propose a vote to not go forward with it.
So I believe that that's done through a motion. Before moving forward, I'll let Adele speak, and then Eric can speak to the motion.
All I was going to say was I support that position.
And then, so Eric, I believe that now that Will has put forward formally, he said propose a vote, but I think it's more a motion. If you could just give us some guidance on next steps.
Yeah, if it's all right, Chair, could I please confirm what the content of the motion? So I've just jotted down here that the Accessibility Advisory Committee recommend to staff not to make an exception, but I'm not sure if there's any additional wording required on that.
Yeah, I would say to make a motion not to go forward with the exception, or even with I would say it's an unnecessary build at that location.
Okay, one moment, please.
Eric, could I suggest that one of the whereas parts would be whereas the committee received a presentation and had the opportunity to discuss the project with staff this evening?
And if I could just ask one more question, I believe it's of Caitlin. So in terms of this motion, so Will's formally put forward a motion. We know that, I know for sure that one person supports and one person opposes that motion, I think. Do we all have to vote on it as a committee?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So Eric will just finalize and repeat for the members present what the motion is. And then each member will be asked by name to indicate whether they support that motion by way of a vote. And then again, regardless of the outcome, that position would be provided to staff, who would take that away. And then under the process for consulting with the AAC, would be required to advise the AAC what they have done with that feedback and with the AAC's input on this matter.
I noticed that Anna Marie has her hand up, and after she speaks, I'll go to Matthew.
Okay, thank you. For instance, I have forgotten about the other two ramps that were close by, so I reconsider my position. I will be against. Thank you. I mean, against, I mean against building the ramp, okay?
Against it. Okay, I'm putting that down. Okay, thanks, Anna.
And Chair, if you don't mind my intervention, in the interest of, this is a bit of an interesting motion in that it's a motion to oppose something. And so I would suggest with your agreement, if when Eric calls for the vote on this, each member indicate whether they support the motion. So we don't get into the yes means no confusion. The members, when called upon, can indicate whether they support Member Van Veen's motion, and Eric has written that up and put it on the screen for you.
Could you read it out as well, just so we're clear on it? Because
Anna Marie, your hand is still up. Definitely, maybe you can do that.
I'm happy to read out the motion moved by Will Van Veen. Whereas committee had the opportunity to discuss the project with staff at this meeting, therefore be it resolved that committee recommend to staff not to make an exception for the dock addition project, as it is not a necessary installation. I'm not sure, Chair, if there are additional hands up to speak to the motion, or
just a point of order. Do we need a seconder before we start discussing the motion? I'm not sure.
Seconders would not be required at committee, Chair.
Matthew?
Yes, thank you. And also thank you for the clarification about the voting for or against the motion, not for or against the exception. I think that's an important nuance. I was just gonna speak actually against the motion. Personally, from the presentation, it sounded to me like they were saying that this is a site that's already used to have access to the water, even without a ramp, and because of like the erosion to the shoreline, the alternative to putting a ramp in was to essentially close the site off. So because of that, with the caveat that they said they're going to put up signage and commit to making the ramp as long as possible in order to make the slope as close as possible to the standards, I would vote against this motion. And that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Matthew. And Wayne?
Actually, I echo exactly the same thoughts. I'm speaking against the motion as well, because my understanding is this site is totally inaccessible right now, and even though the construction and the ramp and the dock won't meet the proper slope, it will make it more accessible than it is. And so it's turning something that's inaccessible into something that's at least partially accessible and usable. And the city has committed to proper signage and also to make, as the previous speaker said, to make the slope as close to the 10% as possible by making the ramp as long as they could possibly make it. So I think it's better to have something that's somewhat accessible than something that's not accessible, which is the current state of that area.
Thank you, and Adele.
Well, I disagree with that last comment because basically we're saying, okay, people with disabilities, you don't have access to that site now, and you won't have access to that site when it's built. You can always go down to the ones further down or whatever, the other ones that are available. If that's the case, so can people without disabilities. They can go to the other ones as well. So closing it off, I don't think is a bad thing. It's just making it equal for both people with disabilities and people without. Thanks.
Thanks, Adele. And Holly?
Hi. Trying to think how to say this well, because it's been a very, very, very long day. I'd like to put in a motion to make our meetings to ensure that they're shorter than 3 hours, but we've never been successful yet, I don't think. In support of this motion, I cannot be. I would have to say I'm not in support of it. I disagree with some of the comments that were made earlier. The reasons for my not being able to support the motion is simply because it is something that is being used. Doing the modifications that they said does make it more accessible to a number of people who are seniors, who are infirm, and who have disabilities. It may not be perfect for all people, depending on how much that 3% difference in that ramp makes. And while there are other areas to go through, 1.5 kilometers away, if I recall the slides correctly, in the information that they gave, 1.5 kilometers can be a very long distance for someone to travel to some extent. And I think it's important to remember there's no perfect universal accessible design. A lot of things that make something accessible to me as a person who is visually impaired, as well as a person who is mobility impaired, will make it inaccessible for somebody else depending on their disability needs. Therefore, I'm in favor of it being made, even though there's an exception that they may have to do to it.
because it does increase the accessibility in a spot that actually sounds like it requires it, because it would actually increase public safety overall to have a terrain that is being eroded and sounds like it's not the safest thing to walk on, to be something that's more safe, period. Right? And therefore can help prevent things like injuries, some of them which could be permanent, potentially. It's just some things to keep in mind. And those are some of my reasons why I do not support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands up, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Eric. No. Okay, so I think at this point we'll hold our vote. And maybe I'll just add one comment because I haven't commented. Like, I'm a certified risk manager, and I think we have to, just for the city's consideration, I'm just going to put it on the record. They do have to think about liability issues in terms of this and having a slope that's steeper than what it should be. There are certain concerns I have in terms of risk management for the city. So I'm just putting that out. So moving on to the vote. Eric, do I go around the table? Okay.
It's up to you, Chair. I have a list. I have a voting list ready to go if that's helpful, or you may read through.
Fantastic. If you would do it for me,
Okay.
that would be. Thank you.
Ian Burry, Ana Maria Cruz Valderrama, Ana Maria, you might be muted.
Yeah, yes, sorry. Yes.
So just a reminder for the members, Chair, if they could indicate in favor of the motion or opposed to the motion, that would be helpful to have a clear vote result.
Okay. So in my case, in favor.
Okay, thank you. Wayne Antle.
I'm opposed to the motion.
Matthew Elliott.
Opposed to the motion?
Holly Ellingwood.
Opposed to the motion.
Jody Fisher. Adele Fury.
I can't remember what I'm supposed to say. I'm not opposed.
So you're in favor of the motion?
In favor, thank you. It's a long day.
No problem. David Humphreys, Vanya Karam.
So I am opposed to the motion.
Opposed. Marie McDonald, William Van Veen.
Thanks, and I'm learning. I'll make the motions less confusing next time. I will support the motion. Thank you.
And Hannah Walad.
Opposed to the motion. Thank you.
3 votes in favor of the motion and 5 votes opposed to the motion.
Okay, great. So with that, Eric, you can action that in terms of providing the feedback back to the city staff. And moving on to the next thing. And before we move on to 2023 meeting schedule, I just want to put out there, these meetings can be quite long. We will try. I would love to try to endeavor to make them shorter, Holly. I'm first and foremost for that. But I know that on our last term, sometimes the meetings even went till 10 or even like a little bit past 10. And I would prefer that not to happen because it makes it hard on everybody. Hopefully tonight we can get out of here maybe before 9:30, hopefully. So moving on to the next item, the meeting schedule that was sent out. I wanted to hear if anybody has concerns with the current schedule as posted.
Chair, would it be helpful if I read the proposed meeting dates for the remainder of the year?
That would be great. Thank you. And remember on the schedule, there's June. Oh, it's on there now, June 6th, June 20th. Okay.
That's correct, Chair. So there's an additional meeting scheduled for June 6th. to allow for a staff required timeline for consultation. So there's 2 meetings in June. So the remainder of the proposed meetings for 2023 are June 6, June 20, August 15, September 19, October 17, and November 21. And these are all Tuesdays. So then it would be up to committee to simply confirm the schedule if there's no objections. It generally follows the rule of thumb of the 3rd Tuesday of every month, which has been consistent with past years as well.
Okay. So with that, we will confirm the schedule because there are no concerns raised. So perfect. Easy enough. Thank you very much, everybody. And the next thing was working group updates. So just for everybody who's new, so this committee has a number of people who were serving on specific subcommittees or working groups. For example, I was on the Paratranspo working group, as well as the parking stakeholder consultation working group. Moving on to updates. Anna Marie, you have your hand raised.
Sure. I have been serving in the planning, and I don't want to continue. I think I have served my duty. Would like to work in the paratransport and transportation committee and continue with the, oh my God, the working group that we, Taya. Yes.
The accessibility working group, Anna Maria.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I'm tired. It's a long day.
No problem.
So, I would love to continue on that. And again, paratransport. And if the planning and housing committee is created, and me working to that as well. Oh, no planning, but it's going, no, I don't want any planning, sorry. Emergency and prepare, no, there is something about community service committee. So I'll leave it in 3 committees. And I will finish with my planning review that I have. I think I still have 3 for one next week and following weeks. So I will fulfill into that. But after that, after May, nothing else on planning review. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna Maria. I'm just wondering, so for the update.
I'm sorry, Vanya, I forgot to say something. Nothing is stated about, nothing is mentioned about the senior roundtable. In case that is reemerge, I would like to continue serving in that senior roundtable. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask, I don't know who I should be asking it, maybe Eric. So in terms of the updates, how does that work? Like, what are you looking for from us in terms of the updates for working groups?
I'm not sure, Megan, would it be putting you on the spot if you wanted to speak to the update component? Oh, Caitlin's also raising her hand, so I don't know if Caitlin wants to weigh in, but
Sorry, again, my camera isn't working. This is Caitlin. I'll let Megan, who's regularly attended these meetings, advise on what normally working group member updates would entail. But in terms of the list of existing and ongoing working groups for the committee, given that we don't have all of your members present, and members would like maybe some more time to think about what working groups they would like to be on, the coordinator can circulate for interest after this meeting, and where there is more interest than spots available, that could be brought to the next regular meeting to appoint someone formally.
So Megan, first of all, that's great, Caitlin. I'd love to like have that. Maybe we could have like an email come out with like all the various working groups that are available, and then people could think about it. And if there's like interest from more than one person, similar to what we did last time, you know, we could kind of go around the table and see who will do what. And that could, of course, change over time. I've had people come in and out of working groups in the last committee. But moving on to you, Megan.
Yeah, updates are just generally short. Not all working groups meet on a monthly basis or even a bi-monthly basis. Some are only a few times a year. So updates are really just given on an as needed basis. Those who participate in things like site plan reviews, there's not really much update that needs to happen at this meeting. Or at these meetings, unless there was, you know, something that you wanted to share or concerns that, you know, were common among site plan reviews. So it's really up to the members what they choose to share, but usually that part of the meeting is quite brief.
I think Wayne, you had your hand raised.
Yes, just a quick thing. When the email comes out looking for participants for the working groups, could you list the working groups in the email or just have it as a rich text format document? Because some of the tables were difficult to read with my screen reader in some of the documents that were shared to Dropbox, especially the ones with the committees. So yeah, if in the email you could sort of list the committees, then it would be easier for me to read down over them and decide if I want to put my name in for one of the committees.
We can certainly send that in rich text format, Chair.
And then thanks very much, Wayne. That's great. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I know Caitlin's hand was raised earlier, so I'm not sure if it was taken down on purpose or.
I believe that was from her last.
The last.
It was. The technical difficulties with me continue, so I had nothing more to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Caitlin. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. So notice of motions. So we have that one motion. Is there anything else that we would want to mention here, Eric?
Notices of motion would be for motions to be considered at future meetings. So unless the members brought one forward, I haven't received any, then there would be no notices of motion at this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then inquiries, anything there? No. Okay. And then other business. Is there any other business that anybody needs or would like to raise? No. Okay, so hearing nothing. Adjournment. So in terms of adjourning, do we need any like motion or second or anything like that, Eric, to adjourn the meeting?
Not formally, no. Typically, the chair would simply ask for adjournment, and everyone would agree.
Okay, so ask for an adjournment to finish before 9. Fantastic.
1 minute.
Our next meeting will be June the 6th. And I've just opened the floor for like 30 seconds. Is there anything else before we close our meeting? No? Okay, well, thank you. That was a pretty intense first meeting, I have to say. But I think we got through it and we did pretty well as a committee, considering it's our first time together.
Great job as your first time as chair. So
yes,
great, thanks.
Well
done.
Yeah. So thanks very much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Okay, bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
See you next time, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take
Thank
care.
Wow,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.